The ship that carried Marcus Cole toward his new life was cold and silent, and he sat alone in a small room with metal walls that hummed with alien technology he could not understand. He was 34 years old, a commander in Earth's military forces, a man who had seen 3 wars and lost more friends than he cared to remember. Now, he was being sent to marry an alien princess he had never met. And the whole thing felt like a bad joke that nobody was laughing at. Earth had made first contact with the Valkyrie Dominion only 2 years ago. And in that short time, humanity had learned a painful truth. They were not special. The Valkyrie ruled over 1,000 worlds, and their empire stretched across the galaxy like a web of stars. They lived for thousands of years. They could read minds with a single thought, and they looked at humans the way humans might look at insects. Interesting, perhaps, but certainly not important. The marriage had been arranged by politicians who smiled too much and spoke in careful words about peace and cooperation. Marcus knew the truth behind their smiles. Earth needed the Valkyrie medical technology to cure diseases that still killed millions. Every year, his own mother was dying from one such disease, her body slowly failing while doctors shook their heads and offered nothing but sympathy. When the council had asked for volunteers to serve as a diplomatic consort to one of the Valkyrie princesses, Marcus had stepped forward without hesitation. If marrying some alien royal meant his mother could live, then he would do it gladly. He would have done far worse things for her sake. The ship shuddered as it docked with Thyra Station, the massive orbital palace where the Valkyrie Empress held her court. Marcus stood and looked at himself in the polished metal wall. He saw a tall man with short dark hair and tired eyes, wearing a formal uniform that felt stiff and uncomfortable. He did not look like a groom. He looked like a prisoner being delivered to his cella. Valkyrie guard came to escort him through the station, and Marcus followed in silence. The halls were beautiful in a cold and empty way, with high ceilings and walls that glowed with soft light. Everything was clean and perfect and utterly without warmth. The Valkyrie themselves were tall and slender, with pale silver skin and eyes that shone like polished gems. They moved with a grace that made Marcus feel clumsy and rough, and they looked at him with expressions that held no emotion at all. He was taken to a grand chamber where hundreds of Valkyrie had gathered, their faces blank and their thoughts hidden behind walls of ice. At the far end of the room stood a throne made of crystal, and upon it sat Empress Saleth herself. She was ancient beyond measure, her beauty terrible and cold, and her eyes passed over Marcus like he was nothing more than furniture. Beside the throne stood 7 figures in royal gowns, and Marcus knew these must be the 7 princesses of the Dominion. 6 of them stood tall and proud, their faces holding the same cold perfection as their mother, but the 7th stood apart from the others, her head bowed and her shoulders hunched as if she was trying to make herself smaller. This was Princess Lyris, the one he had been sent to marry. Marcus had been told very little about her, only that she was the youngest daughter and that the marriage was considered a minor matter by the Valkyrie court. Looking at her now, he understood why the other princesses radiated power and confidence. But Lyris looked like someone who had been beaten down by life until she had forgotten how to stand up straight. The ceremony was brief and cold, with words spoken in the Valkyrie language that Marcus did not understand. No one smiled, no one celebrated. And when it was over, the crowd simply turned and walked away as if nothing important had happened. Marcus found himself standing alone with his new wife in an empty hallway, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Lyris was beautiful in the way all Valkyrie were beautiful, with silver hair that fell past her shoulders and eyes the color of pale violet. But there was something broken in the way she held herself, something wounded in the way she refused to meet his gaze. "I am told we must share quarters," she said, and her voice was soft and flat. "That is fine with me," Marcus replied. She finally looked at him then, and her eyes were filled with confusion. "You are not angry?" Should I be? You have been forced to marry me, she said, and there was something bitter in her words. I am the punishment they give to primitive species who reach too high. And you are the sacrifice your people made to earn our favor. Marcus considered this for a moment, then shrugged. I have been through worse things than marriage. Lyris stared at him as if he had spoken in a language she could not translate. You are strange, she said finally. I have been told that before. She led him through the station to their shared quarters. A set of rooms that were larger and more luxurious than anything Marcus had ever seen on Earth, but they felt empty somehow, like a museum display rather than a home. The court believes this marriage is my shame, Lyris said as she stood by a window that looked out at the stars. I was born without the full telepathic abilities of my kind, and for 300 years they have reminded me that I am broken and wrong. And now they have given me to a human as proof that I am worth nothing more. Marcus watched her as she spoke, and he noticed something that made his chest tight with an emotion he could not name. Her eyes were wet, and her hands were trembling, and she was fighting hard to keep her face blank and empty. She had been crying in a society that viewed emotions as primitive weakness. This princess had been crying alone in the dark, and no one had noticed or cared. 300 years is a long time to be told you are worthless, Marcus said quietly. Lyris turned to look at him, and for just a moment her mask slipped, and he saw the pain underneath. It is, she whispered. Marcus thought about his mother back on Earth, fighting for her life. He thought about the soldiers he had lost in wars that had seemed so important at the time. He thought about all the times he had felt alone and forgotten, and wondered if anyone would notice if he simply disappeared. I know what it feels like, he said. Not for 300 years, but I know. Lyris studied his face as if searching for a lie, and when she found none, her expression shifted into something that might have been wonder. You are very strange, she said again, but this time it sounded almost like a compliment. Get some rest, Marcus told her. Tomorrow we can figure out what this marriage is supposed to be. He turned and walked to his own room, leaving her standing by the window with stars reflected in her violet eyes as he lay down on the unfamiliar bed. Marcus thought about the broken princess and the cold empire that had shaped her. He had come here expecting nothing but duty and sacrifice, but something told him that this was going to be far more complicated than he had planned. The days on Thyra's station passed slowly, and Marcus learned to navigate the cold halls of the Volcari court like a ghost moving through a world that did not want him there. The other aliens ignored him completely, their eyes sliding past him as if he was invisible. When they did acknowledge his presence, it was with looks of mild disgust or quiet amusement, like adults watching a child pretend to be important. But Marcus had survived worse things than being ignored, and he refused to let their contempt break him. Instead, he focused on the one person in the station who seemed even more alone than he was. Princess Lyris spent most of her time in their shared quarters, reading texts on glowing screens or staring out at the endless stars. She rarely spoke to him in those first weeks, and when she did, her words were short and careful, as if she expected him to use them against her. Somehow Marcus understood her caution. 300 years of cruelty had taught her that kindness was often just another weapon, but he was patient, and he was stubborn, and he had nothing else to do with his time. He started with small things. He would bring her food from the station's dining halls, strange alien dishes that tasted like nothing he had ever experienced on Earth. He would sit across from her while she ate, not demanding conversation, just being present. At first she seemed confused by this, watching him with suspicious eyes, as if waiting for the trap to reveal itself. Why do you eat with me? She asked one evening. Because eating alone is sad, Marcus replied. No one else thinks so. No one else is human. She considered this for a long moment, then returned to her meal without another word. But the next evening she waited for him before she started eating. And Marcus counted that as a small victory as the weeks passed. He learned more about the Valkyrie and their ancient society. They lived for thousands of years, which meant they had forgotten how to value time. They could read minds, which meant they had never learned how to trust. Words, they had suppressed their emotions so completely that they had forgotten what it felt like to truly care about anything. Lyris was different, because she had been born with weaker telepathic powers, and this meant she could not share thoughts the way other Valkyrie did, but it also meant she felt things more deeply than her kind was supposed to feel. She experienced joy and sorrow and fear and hope. And her people had taught her that these feelings made her defective. "They say I am broken," she told Marcus one night as they sat by the window, watching ships drift past the station. "They say my emotions are a sickness that proves I am less than what I should be." "On Earth, we have a different view," Marcus said. "What view?" "We think feeling things deeply is what makes life worth living." Lyris turned to look at him, and her violet eyes were wide with something that might have been hunger. "Tell me more," she said. "Tell me about your world." So Marcus told her stories of Earth, of blue skies and green forests and oceans that stretched beyond the horizon. He told her about music that could make people cry and art that could make them dream. He told her about love and friendship and the fierce determination of humans who refused to surrender even when all hope seemed lost. Lyris listened to every word as if he was describing paradise. And slowly the walls she had built around herself began to crumble. She started asking questions about human customs and beliefs, about the songs they sang and the stories they told their children. She laughed for the first time in a century. When Marcus described a comedy film he had loved as a boy, and the sound of her laughter was like bells ringing in an empty church, but their growing friendship did not go unnoticed. Other Valkyrie watched with disapproval as Lyris began to change. As color returned to her cheeks and light returned to her eyes, her sisters whispered in the corners of the court, their thoughts passing between them like poison flowing through water. One evening there was a grand ceremony in the main hall. A gathering of nobles from across the Dominion. Marcus stood beside Lyris as hundreds of aliens filled the chamber, their silver skin gleaming under the artificial lights. Crown Princess Valeth, the eldest of the 7 sisters, approached them with a smile that held no warmth. "I see our little embarrassment has found a pet to keep her company," Valeth said, her voice carrying across the room so that everyone could hear. The crowd fell silent, turning to watch. "Tell me, sister," Valeth continued, "has the human taught you any new tricks? Perhaps you bark for him when he feeds you." The laughter that followed was quiet and cruel, and Marcus saw Lyris shrink beside him, her shoulders curling inward the way they had on the day they first met. Something hot and fierce ignited in his chest. "Excuse me," Marcus said, and his voice was loud enough to silence the laughter. Valeth looked at him with surprise, as if she had forgotten he could speak. "You dare address me directly, human?" "I do," Marcus said, stepping forward so that he stood between Valeth and Lyris. "And I have something to say." The crowd murmured with shock at his boldness, but Marcus did not care. "Where I come from, we have a word for people who mock those weaker than themselves," he said. "We call them cowards, because true strength is not about tearing others down. It is about lifting them up." Valeth's eyes narrowed with anger, but Marcus continued, "You think Princess Lyris is broken because she feels things deeply. But I think you are afraid of her because she has something you have lost. She has a heart that still works, and in all your thousands of years, you have forgotten what that feels like." The silence in the chamber was absolute. Every Valkyrie stared at him with expressions ranging from shock to fury to something that looked almost like wonder. "You know nothing of our ways," Valeth hissed. "Maybe not," Marcus agreed. "But I know that cruelty is the same in every language. And I know that your sister deserves better than what you have given her." He turned and offered his hand to Lyris, who stared at him with tears streaming down her silver cheeks. "Come on," he said gently. "We do not need to stay here." Lyris took his hand, her fingers trembling against his palm. And together they walked out of the chamber. Behind them, the court erupted into chaos. Voices rising in anger and disbelief. But Marcus did not look back. He kept his eyes forward and his hand wrapped around Lyris's. And he felt her grip tighten as if she was holding on to the only solid thing in a universe that had always tried to drown her when they reached their quarters. Lyris finally spoke. "No one has ever defended me before," she whispered. "That is going to change." Marcus told her. She looked up at him with those violet eyes. And for the first time since he had met her, she smiled. It was small and uncertain and fragile. But it was real, and Marcus knew in that moment that everything had changed. 5 years had passed since the tribunal that changed everything, and the galaxy had become a different place. Marcus stood on the balcony of the embassy building on New Harmony, a colony world that humans and Valkyrie had built together as a symbol of their growing alliance. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of celebration. Music and laughter mixing together as two species that had once viewed each other with suspicion now danced and talked and shared stories. Like old friends, it had not been easy getting here. The years after the tribunal had been filled with challenges and setbacks, with conservatives on both sides who feared change and fought against it with everything they had. But something had shifted in the Valkyrie Dominion that day in the throne room. A crack in the wall of emotional suppression that had grown wider. With each passing month, young Valkyrie began asking questions their elders had forbidden for centuries. They wanted to know about human art and music, about the stories humans told and the feelings those stories evoked. They wanted to understand why this short-lived species seemed so alive compared to their own ancient civilization. Lyris had become the center of this transformation, not through force or politics, but simply by existing as proof that emotion and logic could coexist. She had published her poetry, and it had spread through the Dominion like seeds carried on the wind. Her words spoke of love and loss and hope and fear, feelings that the Valkyrie had told themselves were primitive and dangerous. But hearing them described so beautifully, reading them in the voice of their own princess, made them wonder if perhaps they had been wrong. The Empress herself had changed, though slowly and cautiously, as befitted someone who had lived for millennia. She had begun meeting with human diplomats and scholars, asking questions about Earth's history and culture with genuine curiosity rather than condescension. Marcus had heard that she kept a collection of human paintings in her private chambers, and that she sometimes stood before them for hours, studying the emotions captured in color and form. "You look thoughtful," Lyris said, stepping onto the balcony beside him. Marcus turned to look at his wife, and even after 5 years, the sight of her still made his heart beat faster. She had grown into her confidence over these years, standing tall and proud in a way she never had when they first met. The broken princess was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own worth and refused to let anyone tell her otherwise. "I was thinking about how far we have come," Marcus said, "from a forced marriage to this." Lyris said, gesturing at the celebration behind them. "It does seem rather improbable when you say it out loud." Marcus laughed, and Lyris smiled at the sound. "My mother sent a message today," she said. "She wants us to return to Thyra Station for a celebration of the Alliance anniversary. Will your sisters be there?" "Most of them," Lyris said, "including some who have apologized for how they treated me, and some who have not but are at least pretending to be civil. Progress is progress. That is a very human way of looking at things. You say that like it is a bad thing." Lyris reached out and took his hand, intertwining her silver fingers with his darker ones. "No," she said softly. "I say it like it is the best thing." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear as the sky darkened. Marcus thought about the man he had been when this journey started. A broken soldier who had given up on finding meaning in his life. He had agreed to this marriage not out of hope, but out of desperation, sacrificing himself so that his mother could receive the treatment that saved her life. He had expected nothing but duty and endurance. Instead, he had found something he had not known. He was looking for. Lyris had not just changed Valkyrie society, she had changed him. She had taught him that vulnerability was not weakness, that showing emotion was not the same as being controlled by it. She had shown him that the walls he had built to survive were the same walls that kept him from truly living. "What are you thinking?" Lyris asked. "I am thinking about who I was before I met you," Marcus said. "I was so closed off, so convinced that caring about anything would only lead to pain. And you showed me that I was wrong." "We taught each other," Lyris said. "You showed me that my feelings were not a defect, and I showed you that yours were not a burden. We make a good team. The best." Lyris agreed. A group of young Valkyrie passed by the balcony doors, laughing at something one of them had said. They were a new generation, raised in a dominion that was slowly learning to feel again. Many of them had human friends, had studied human culture, had learned to express emotions their grandparents would have found shocking and primitive. They were the future, and they carried the seeds of change within them. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we had never met," Lyris said. "I try not to think about that, because it makes you sad, because it makes me grateful." Marcus said, "Everything I am now, everything we have built together, started because two broken people were pushed into the same room and decided to help each other heal." Lyris leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "My mother asked me once if I regretted being married to a human," she said. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that marrying you was the first real choice I ever made," Lyris said. "It was supposed to be a punishment, but I chose to make it something else. I chose to let you in when everything in my upbringing told me to push you away." She looked up at him with those violet eyes that still held all the wonder of someone seeing the universe clearly for the first time. "I told her that you are the best thing that ever happened to me." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You were supposed to be my punishment too," he said. "A sacrifice I made for my mother's life. But instead you became my purpose." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "You taught me that love is not weakness," he said. "You showed me that a short life lived with meaning is worth more than an eternity of emptiness. And you gave me a reason to be better than I thought I could be." Lyris smiled, and there were tears in her eyes. The beautiful tears of someone who had learned that feeling deeply was the greatest gift in the universe. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," Marcus replied. They kissed as the stars watched, and the sounds of celebration floated through the air around them, below them. On the streets of New Harmony, humans and Valkyrie walked side by side, sharing food and music and stories above them. Ships from both species traveled the stars together, exploring and building and dreaming, and across the galaxy, in 1,000 languages and 1,000,000 voices. A new proverb had begun to spread. It was spoken by young Valkyrie who had discovered what their ancestors had forgotten. It was whispered by ancient ones who felt the first stirrings of emotions they had suppressed for centuries. It was carved into monuments and written in poems and sung in songs that made people cry. To love like a human is to burn briefly and beautifully, the saying went. And to make that burning mean something, Marcus had come to the stars expecting to be a pawn, a sacrifice, a symbol of humanity's place beneath the ancient empires. Instead, he had become something far more important. He had become proof that the shortest-lived species in the galaxy had something that all the immortal wisdom of the Valkyrie could not match. He had become proof that emotions were not primitive but precious, and in the end, he had become exactly what he was always meant to be, not a punishment, but a beginning. Word of what happened at the ceremony spread through the Dominion like fire spreading through dry grass. And within days, everyone was talking about the human who had dared to challenge. A crown princess some called Marcus foolish and arrogant. A primitive creature who did not know his place, but others whispered different things in the quiet corners of the station. And their whispers carried questions that had not been asked in. Centuries questions about emotion and feeling and what it meant to truly be a live empress. Salith summoned Marcus to her throne room on a cold morning when the stars outside seemed especially distant and dim. He walked alone through the gleaming halls, feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes upon him, even though the corridors appeared empty when he entered the throne room. The Empress sat waiting with her ancient face unreadable and her gem-like eyes fixed upon him like the gaze of a predator, watching prey. Come closer. Human, she commanded. Marcus obeyed, stopping a respectful distance from the crystal throne. The Empress studied him for a long moment, and he felt something brush against his mind like cold fingers trying to find a grip, but his thoughts were chaotic and wild, jumping from memory to memory without pattern or logic. And he sensed her frustration as she tried and failed to read him clearly. Your mind is like a storm, she said, chaotic and loud and impossible to navigate. I have been told that humans are difficult to read telepathically, Marcus replied. Difficult is an understatement, the Empress said, and there was something almost like curiosity in her voice. Your thoughts are everywhere at once, tangled together in ways that make no sense. We call it thinking, Marcus said. The Empress did not smile, but something shifted in her expression. You defended my youngest daughter against my eldest, she said. This was either very brave or very foolish, and I have not yet decided which. It was necessary. Why? The Empress asked, leaning forward slightly. What does it matter to you how we treat our own? You are here as a symbol, nothing more. A decoration meant to show our dominance over your species. Marcus met her gaze without flinching. Because someone should, he said simply. The Empress was silent for a long moment, and Marcus could see something working behind her ancient eyes. You humans live such short lives, she said finally. A handful of decades, and then you are gone forever. Yet you fight and struggle and care about things that will not matter once you are dust. That is exactly why we care, Marcus told her. Because we know our time is limited, every moment becomes precious. Every person we love becomes a choice we make knowing we will lose them. That sounds like pain. It is, Marcus agreed. But it is also what makes joy possible. You cannot have light without darkness, and you cannot have love without the risk of loss. The Empress sat back on her throne, and for the first time since Marcus had met her, she looked uncertain. The Velkari abandoned such things long ago, she said. We decided that emotions were weaknesses that clouded judgment and caused unnecessary suffering. And are you happy? Marcus asked. The question hung in the air between them, and the Empress did not answer. You may go, she said finally. But know that I will be watching you, human, and watching what you do to my daughter. Marcus bowed and left the throne room, his heart beating fast with a mixture of fear and strange hope. In the weeks that followed, Lyris continued to change in ways that surprised even Marcus. She began writing poetry in secret, filling pages with words about stars and silence and the feeling of warmth. Against cold skin, she asked Marcus to teach her human songs, and she sang them quietly when she thought no one was listening. She laughed more often, and her laughter grew stronger each time. No longer the fragile sound of someone afraid to be heard. I feel like I am waking up from a long sleep, she told Marcus one evening as they walked through a garden filled with plants from a dozen different worlds. For 300 years I was numb, and now everything is so bright and loud and overwhelming. Is it too much? Marcus asked. No, Lyra said, and she smiled at him with such genuine joy that it made his chest ache. It is wonderful. I did not know wonderful was possible until you showed me, but their happiness was fragile. And danger was growing in the shadows of the court. Crown Princess Velith had not forgotten her humiliation, and her hatred for Marcus burned hotter with each passing day. She gathered allies among the nobles who believed that humanity was a disease that needed to be cut out before it spread further. Through whispered conversations and secret meetings, a plot took shape. Marcus would die in what appeared to be an accident, and Lyris would be sent away to a distant outpost where she could be forgotten forever. Velith's spies moved through the station like shadows, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But Lyris had spent 300 years being overlooked and ignored, and she had learned to pay attention to things that others missed. She noticed the strange looks that certain servants gave Marcus when he walked past. She noticed the whispered conversations that stopped suddenly when she approached. She noticed the cold satisfaction in Velith's eyes whenever she looked at them. One night she followed a servant who had been watching Marcus too closely, and she listened at a door as plans were discussed in hushed tones. What she heard made her blood run cold. They were going to kill him in 3 days, during a ceremony when the station's security would be focused elsewhere. It would look like a malfunction in the life support system, a tragic accident that no one could have prevented. Lyris ran back to their quarters with her heart pounding and her mind racing. She found Marcus reading a message from Earth, his face tired but peaceful, and she stood before him with tears in her eyes. "They are going to kill you," she said, and her voice shook with fear and anger. Marcus looked up at her, and his expression grew serious. "Tell me everything," he said. So she told him about the plot and the conspirators and the timeline they had set. When she finished, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "We need to expose them," he said finally. "It will be my word against Velith's," Lyris said. "No one will believe me. Then we need proof." Lyris shook her head, and the tears spilled down her cheeks. "This is my fault," she whispered. "If you had not defended me, they would not be trying to hurt you." Marcus reached out and took her hands in his, and his grip was warm and steady. "Listen to me," he said. "I do not regret anything, and I'm not going to let them win." Lyris looked into his eyes, and she saw something there that she had never seen in the eyes of her own people. She saw courage that came from love rather than pride, and determination that burned because of her rather than in spite of her. "I will not let them take you from me," she said, and her voice was fierce with a strength she had not known she possessed in that moment. Something changed between them. They were no longer a human and an alien forced together by politics. They were two people standing together against a universe that wanted to tear them apart, and neither of them intended to lose. The next 2 days were a blur of careful planning and quiet fear as Marcus and Lyris prepared to expose the conspiracy that threatened their lives. They could not trust anyone in the court, so they worked alone, gathering evidence piece by piece like soldiers mapping enemy territory. Lyris used her status as a princess to access security records, finding traces of the secret meetings that Velith had tried to hide. Marcus studied the station systems, looking for the sabotage that had been prepared to kill him. Together, they built a case that could not be ignored, a web of proof that connected Crown Princess Velith to attempted murder on the morning of the 3rd day. They requested a formal tribunal before the Empress. Such requests were rare in Velkari society, where disputes were usually settled through telepathic consensus and private negotiation. But Marcus was human and could not participate in such things, which meant the ancient rules of open tribunal still applied to any accusations involving him. The Great Hall was packed with nobles and officials from across the Dominion, all of them curious about the spectacle that was about to unfold. Empress Salith sat upon her crystal throne with her face carved from ice, and her 7 daughters stood in a line beside her. Velith's expression was calm and confident, like a predator who believed she had already won. But Lyris stood tall beside Marcus, and for the first time in her life, she did not shrink away from her sister's gaze. "You have called this tribunal," the Empress said, her voice echoing through the silent hall. "Speak your accusation." Marcus stepped forward, and every eye in the room turned to watch him. "Crown Princess Valid has conspired to murder me," he said clearly. "She has gathered allies and planned an assassination disguised as an accident, all because she cannot accept that her youngest sister has found happiness." The hall erupted in shocked murmurs, and Velith laughed with cold amusement. "The human lies," she said. "He is desperate and delusional, grasping at fantasies because he knows his place among us is worthless. I have proof." Marcus said he presented the evidence they had gathered. The security recordings and communication logs and testimony from servants who had chosen to tell the truth rather than remain complicit in murder. Each piece of proof was projected for the entire court to see. And with each revelation, the murmurs grew louder and more disturbed. Vile's confidence began to crack as her supporters shifted uncomfortably and avoided her gaze. "This proves nothing," she insisted. But her voice had lost its certainty. "These records could have been fabricated. These servants could have been bribed. Then let us settle this simply," Marcus said. "Let those you conspired with step forward and declare their innocence before the Empress herself." It was a challenge that Velith could not refuse, because to do so would be to admit guilt in the eyes of the court. One by one her allies were called forward, and one by one they crumbled under the weight of the Empress's telepathic examination. Their thoughts betrayed them, revealing the truth of what they had planned. By the time the last conspirator had confessed, Velith stood alone and exposed, her carefully constructed schemes destroyed in front of everyone she had hoped to impress. "You have been found guilty," the Empress declared, and her voice was heavy with disappointment and anger. "You conspired against a diplomatic guest and brought shame upon our house." Velith fell to her knees, her composure finally shattering. "He's just a human," she screamed. "They are insects compared to us. Why do you protect them?" "Because they are our guests," the Empress said. "And because we are not the monsters you would make us." She turned to look at Marcus, and something had changed in her ancient eyes. "The human accused has shown courage and dignity throughout this tribunal," she said. "More courage than many in this court have shown in 1,000 years. And I find myself wondering what else his kind might teach us if we were willing to learn." The crowd fell silent, stunned by words they had never expected to hear from their Empress. "Velith shall be exiled to the outer territories," the Empress continued. "Stripped of her claim to succession and forbidden from returning to this court." The guards moved forward to escort the fallen princess away, and Velith cast one final look of hatred at Marcus and Lyris before she was taken from the hall. But the tribunal was not yet finished. "I have a question for the human," the Empress said, and Marcus felt the weight of her attention like a physical force pressing against him. "Your species clings to love even though it causes pain," she said. "You hold on to hope even when logic tells you it is foolish. Why? What is it about humanity that makes you unable to let go?" Marcus thought for a moment before answering, and when he spoke his voice carried through the silent hall. "Because we only have a handful of decades," he said. "Every moment matters to us. Every person we love is a choice we make knowing we will lose them someday. But we make that choice anyway, because the alternative is to live without meaning." He paused, looking around at the thousands of ancient faces watching him. "You have forgotten what that feels like," he continued. "You have lived so long that time has lost its value. And you have suppressed your emotions so completely that you have forgotten why they mattered in the first place." The Empress stared at him, and Marcus saw something flicker in her eyes that looked almost like grief. "We chose logic because emotions caused us pain," she said quietly. "But without pain there can be no joy," Marcus replied. "Without risk there can be no love, and without love, what is the point of living forever?" The question hung in the air, and no one had an answer that night. After the tribunal had ended and the court had dispersed, Lyris found Marcus standing alone on a balcony overlooking the stars. "You did something impossible today," she said, coming to stand beside him. "I just told the truth." "No," Lyris said. And she took his hand in hers. "You made them listen. You made them question things they have believed for thousands of years. And you did it not with weapons or threats, but with words and feeling." She turned to face him, and her violet eyes were bright with tears. "I have felt more alive in this one human year than in 3 centuries of existence," she said. "You taught me that my emotions are not a defect, but a gift. And you gave me the courage to stand up for myself when I had forgotten how." Marcus looked at her. This silver-skinned princess who had been broken by her own people and rebuilt by her own choice. "You did the hard work yourself," he said. "I just reminded you what you were capable of." Lyris smiled. And then she said 3 words in a voice that trembled with emotion. "I love you." Marcus felt his heart stop, because those words meant something different to the Valkyrie than they did to humans. For them, it was a concept without translation, an alien idea that their language had never needed to describe, but Lyris had learned it from him, had felt it grow inside her until it could no longer be contained. "I love you too," Marcus said, and he pulled her into his arms. They stood there together as the stars turned slowly around them. 2 people from different worlds who had found something that both of their species had been searching for, something that made all the pain and struggle and fear worth enduring, something that felt very much like hope.